The moment she met his eyes and said, "Choose another," a silence fell over the great hall, so absolute, it felt like the mountain itself had stopped breathing. Verity was an Omega, a keeper of histories, a woman who smelled of parchment dust and faded ink, valued less than the lowest-ranking warrior. He was Roan, the Alpha King of the northern clans, a conqueror whose name was a blade, a man who had carved an empire from stone and blood. Every other woman in the hall, from the highest-born Alpha to the humblest servant, had knelt, their heads bowed, their necks bared in a gesture of primal submission. But Verity had remained standing, her gaze level, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, and for the first time since the old wars had burned the softness from his soul. His wolf, the beast of iron and shadow within him, rose not in fury, but in stunned recognition. If you believe that being truly seen is the most powerful magic of all, type "I see you" below and let me tell you what happened next. To understand how she got there, you need to know that Verity lived her life in the quiet spaces between the loud moments of others. Her world was the scriptorium of the Blackwood Pack, a circular stone room tucked away at the base of the western tower. It was a place of deep shadows and the comforting scent of aging leather and beeswax. Here, she was not Verity the Omega, the girl with unremarkable brown hair and eyes the color of moss after rain. Here she was the archivist. Her fingers, stained with ink, knew the texture of history. She mended torn scrolls, rebound crumbling books, and traced the faded lineage of warriors and alphas whose stories were now dust. She was useful but unseen, a tool to be kept sharp and stored away until needed. That was the way of things. The pack valued strength, the crash of shield on shield, the roar of a challenge, the sharp scent of dominance. Verity's strength was in her patience, in the steady beat of her heart as she brought a dying story back to life. It was a language no one else cared to speak. Her wound was not a scar on the skin, but an ache in her soul, carved by a lifetime of being looked through. When the pack Alpha, Lord Valerius, passed her in the corridors, his eyes slid over her as if she were a tapestry on the wall. His daughter, Kate, a proud and beautiful Alpha female, treated her with a kind of careless disdain, like a hound that was too old to hunt, but kept around out of habit. Then news came like a thunderclap rolling down from the high peaks. Alpha King Roan was coming. His name was a legend, a grim fireside tale told to frighten pups. He had united the warring northern clans through sheer, unrelenting will. They called him the Iron Wolf, for he was said to feel no pain and show no mercy. He had bled for his crown and expected the world to bleed for him in return, and now his consolidation of power required one final piece: a mate. Not for love, the emissaries had made clear, but for alliance. A union to seal the loyalty of the southern packs. Blackwood was to be the first pack he visited. The command had been simple: present every unwed female of age. The honor was immense, the terror just as great. To be chosen was to be shackled to a legend. To be overlooked was to be confirmed as worthless. For 2 weeks, the hold was in a frenzy. Gowns were stitched, jewels were polished, and every eligible daughter practiced the art of kneeling with grace, of offering submission without looking weak. Verity was ignored in all of it, a forgotten ghost in her tower. She was an Omega, an archivist. She was not part of the offering. She was relieved. The thought of standing before that man, that elemental force of command, made her hands tremble, threatening the delicate work of restoring a map of the old territories. The night of the choosing ceremony arrived with a biting wind that howled around the stone fortress. The great hall was suffocating with the scent of pine smoke, roasting meat, and the cloying perfumes of nervous women. Torches spat and crackled in their iron sconces, casting long, dancing shadows that made the tapestries of ancient hunts seem to move. Verity was only there because Lord Valerius had decreed that every soul in the hold must be present to bear witness. She was not with the chosen women lined up on the dais. She was pressed against the cold stone of a back wall, half hidden by a pillar, feeling as small and gray as a mouse in a wolf's den. When he entered, the hall did not just fall silent. The sound was stolen from the air. Alpha King Roan was taller than the legends claimed, broader at the shoulder than any man she had ever seen. He moved with a predatory grace that was utterly at odds with his size, his black leather tunic and fur-lined cloak absorbing the torchlight. His face was hard angles and severity, carved from the same granite as his mountain fortress. A scar, pale and thin, cut through one dark eyebrow, but it was his eyes that held the hall captive. They were the color of winter twilight, a deep, piercing gray that seemed to see everything and value nothing. He radiated a power that was a physical force, pressing down on everyone, demanding obedience. His wolf was a palpable presence, a shadow of raw, controlled violence just beneath his skin. He walked to the center of the hall, his gaze sweeping over the assembled pack. It was a look of assessment, of a king surveying his assets. He stopped before the dais where the chosen women stood, their heads already bowed. His gaze passed over them one by one. Over Kate, proud and beautiful in her crimson gown. Over the others, each one a jewel offered up for his consideration. Verity watched, her heart a slow, heavy thud. She felt a strange pang of pity for them. They were offerings, not people. Their hopes and fears didn't matter. Only their bloodlines did. Then his eyes, those cold gray eyes, continued their sweep of the hall. Past the warriors, past the elders, past the servants. And then they found her. They stopped. For a breathless moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. He was 200 feet away, but it felt as if he stood right in front of her. His gaze wasn't dismissive, it wasn't assessing, it was focused, intense, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't known existed. A flicker of something primal, something ancient, crossed his features. His stillness became absolute, the way a wolf freezes when it catches a scent on the wind. A low murmur rippled through the hall. Who was he looking at? Lord Valerius, mistaking the direction of the king's gaze, stepped forward with a proud smile. "My king," he began, gesturing to his daughter. "Kate is an alpha of the highest." Roan cut him off, not with a word, but with a slight, almost imperceptible lift of his hand. The gesture held such absolute authority that Valerius's mouth snapped shut. The king's eyes never left Verity. He spoke, and his voice was low, a gravelly rumble that carried to every corner of the hall. "You, step forward." A collective gasp. Heads turned. Warriors and nobles followed his line of sight and saw nothing. A pillar, a shadow, and then her. Verity, the ink-stained Omega, the mouse. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. He couldn't mean her. It was a mistake. She pressed herself tighter against the stone, wishing she could melt into it. But his gaze was a physical tether, pulling her. "Now," he commanded, the single word cracking like a whip. Her feet moved without her permission, carrying her out from the shadows. The floor felt vast and empty. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were on her now, filled with disbelief, scorn, and confusion. She could feel Kate's glare burning into her back. She walked the long path to the center of the hall, her simple gray wool dress a stark contrast to the silks and velvets of the other women. She kept her head high, not out of pride, but because it was the only way to keep her legs from trembling. She stopped a respectful 10 feet from him. She did not kneel. She did not bow her head. She simply looked at him, and in that moment, she saw past the Alpha King, past the Iron Wolf. She saw the man. She saw the profound, crushing weight of his duty in the lines around his eyes. She saw a weariness so deep it seemed etched into his bones. He was not a monster from a story. He was a man trapped in a cage of his own making, and her heart, foolish and compassionate, ached for him. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. But his eyes, something shifted in their depths. The gray seemed to warm, to lighten, as if a fire had been kindled far within. For the first time she noticed the scent of him, not just pine and cold mountain air, but something else, something wild and ancient, ozone before a storm. He finally broke the silence. "Your name?" "Verity," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Verity," he repeated, the name a strange sound on his tongue. He took a step closer. The heat rolling off him was staggering. "You did not kneel." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact that demanded an explanation. She could give him the truth, that she was so shocked she had forgotten. Or she could lie, claim some sort of defiance. Instead, a different truth came out, one she hadn't even known was there. "Kneeling is for kings," she said softly. "I saw a man." The fire in his eyes flared, turning them from gray to a startling, luminous silver. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that was not entirely human. His wolf was at the surface, looking through his eyes, and it was not angry. It was captivated. He looked at her, truly looked, and it was like standing in the full light of the sun after a lifetime in the shadows. He saw the ink stains on her fingers. He saw the faint tremor in her hands. He saw the quiet, unyielding strength that held her upright when every instinct screamed for her to fall to her knees. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon the stunned face of Lord Valerius. His voice was no longer a quiet rumble. It was the command of a king, sharp and absolute, ringing off the stone walls. "This one," he declared. "I choose this one." The hall erupted into chaos, shouts of disbelief, Valerius sputtering in outrage, Kate letting out a choked cry of fury. But Verity heard none of it. All she heard was the frantic, terrified beating of her own heart. He had chosen her, the man who was a legend, the king who was a weapon. He had chosen the one person in the room who had nothing to offer him. Panic gave way to a cold, clear certainty. This was a mistake, a terrible, life-altering mistake. He thought he saw something in her, but he was wrong. She was just Verity. She could not be his queen. She could not be the anchor for his alliances. She would be crushed by the weight of his world. And so, as his guards began to move toward her, as the future began to solidify around her like ice, she found her voice again. She met his blazing silver eyes without flinching. "No," she said, the word clear and firm in the sudden hush that her defiance created. "I thank you for the honor, my king, but I am not fit. I am an Omega, A scribe. Please, choose another. The silence that followed was different. It was not mere quiet. It was a void, a terrible, complete absence of sound, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the mountain to fall. The Alpha King had been defied by an Omega in front of his new subjects. Roan did not move. The silver in his eyes burned brighter, a molten, predatory light, a muscle feathered in his jaw. The air grew thick, heavy with his power, with a rage so immense it felt like a physical blow. But his wolf was not angry. His wolf was triumphant. Mine. It snarled in the back of his mind, a possessive, exultant roar. Finally. Mine. He took another step, closing the distance between them until he loomed over her. He was so close she could feel the heat of his body, smell the scent of winter and wildness clinging to him. She had to tilt her head back to see his face. He lowered his head, his voice dropping to a rough, possessive whisper that only she could hear. It was never a choice, he breathed, the words a promise and a sentence. It has always been you. And with that he reached out, his large, calloused hand gently but inexorably closing around her arm. His touch was not brutal, but it was absolute. It was the touch of a king claiming his prize. The journey to Stonefall Hold was a blur of wind and speed. Verity was placed on a formidable black warhorse, seated in front of the king himself. His body was a wall of heat and muscle at her back, one arm a steel band around her waist, holding her secure in the saddle. They rode at a pace that seemed inhuman, the trees blurring into a dark tapestry on either side of the narrow mountain path. His guards, a silent, formidable cohort, rode like shadows around them. No one spoke to her. She was a captured thing, a curiosity. When they stopped to rest the horses, she was given water and food, but the guards' eyes were wary, unreadable. They saw her as their king's strange, inexplicable choice. A madness. Stonefall Hold was not a fortress. It was a scar on the face of the mountain. It rose from the granite cliffs as if it had been clawed from the rock itself, a jagged silhouette of towers and battlements against a perpetually gray sky. It was a place built for war, not for comfort. Cold seeped from the very stones, and the wind that whistled through the arrow slits sounded like a lament. She was taken not to a queen's chambers, but to a suite of rooms in the high, isolated North Tower. They were comfortable enough, with a roaring fire and thick furs on the bed, but the door was made of iron-banded oak, and the single window looked out over a sheer 1,000-foot drop. It was a gilded cage, protection that felt exactly like imprisonment. For days, she saw no one but a stern, silent serving woman who brought her meals and stoked her fire. The loneliness was a heavy cloak. She had been invisible in Blackwood, but here she was isolated, her very existence a question mark in this harsh, unfamiliar world. She spent her hours by the fire, her hands, for the first time in her life, idle. There were no books here, no scrolls to mend. Without her work, she felt adrift, unsure of who she was. On the fourth night, the heavy door creaked open. Roan stood there, filling the doorway, a giant silhouetted by the torchlight from the hall. He had shed his heavy cloak, and in a simple tunic, he seemed both larger and more human. He walked into the room, and the space immediately shrank, charged with his presence. He did not speak at first, merely watched her with those unsettling gray eyes. He moved to the fire, staring down into the flames. "You are afraid," he stated. "I am confused," Verity corrected, finding a sliver of her old defiance. Why am I here? You could have had an alpha mate, a warrior, a princess. You chose me, and you have locked me in a tower. He turned from the fire, his face half in shadow. I did not lock you in. I am keeping you safe. Safe from what? Your own court? They look at me like I am a disease. They are fools, he said, the dismissal sharp and cold. They see with their eyes, not with their blood. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and stopped before her chair. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, a shocking gesture of humility from a man like him. The firelight danced on the sharp planes of his face. My wolf knew you the moment I saw you, he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. Before I even caught your scent, it knew. It has been quiet for a very long time, a sleeping beast. When it saw you, it woke up, and it screamed one word. Mate. Verity's breath caught in her throat. A fated mate. The old stories spoke of them. A bond forged by destiny. A pull of souls so strong it was undeniable. It was a thing of songs and legends, something she'd read about on crumbling scrolls. It wasn't supposed to be real. That's impossible, she whispered. I am an Omega. That is what you were told, he said, his eyes intense. But it is not what you are. Not all of you. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was ancient, the cover worn smooth with time. He opened it on his knee, the pages brittle and yellowed. He pointed to a passage written in a spidery, archaic script she recognized from the deepest archives at Blackwood. My line, the line of the Iron Wolf, is old, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a man reciting a painful truth. Our strength has always been the bond between man and wolf. It is absolute, unbreakable. But for generations, it has been thinning, fading, like a thread worn thin. My father could not fully harness his wolf. His father before him lost the change entirely in his last years. My own bond. He looked away, a flicker of something like shame crossing his face. It is a battle, every day. The beast is there, but the connection is frayed. We are weakening, Verity. My bloodline is dying. He looked back at her, his gaze burning with a desperate intensity. The legends of my house speak of a cure, a counterbalance. They speak of a lineage of Omegas who were not submissive, but anchors. They were called weavers. They did not weave thread, but the very fabric of pack life, of the magic that binds us. They could soothe the wildest wolf, heal the deepest wounds of the spirit, and reinforce the bonds that held us together. They were the heart of the pack, and the alphas were the claws. He tapped the book. The weavers were said to carry a unique scent, parchment, old wood, and something more, the scent of still earth after a rain. He looked at her, and she knew he was smelling it on her now. Your family line, the one Blackwood has forgotten, is here. It is said your line went into hiding centuries ago, suppressing their gifts, pretending to be simple Omegas to escape a purge by a rival clan who feared their power. It all clicked into place. The pull she felt. The way his wolf had recognized her. The ancient, dormant feeling inside her that she had mistaken for simple compassion. It was more. It was a power she never knew she had. You brought me here not just as a mate, she said, the realization dawning. You need a healer. for your bloodline. I need you, he corrected, his voice raw. My wolf needs its anchor. My line needs its heart. Without you, we will fade into nothing more than men. The wolf will be lost to us forever. He looked at her, the great Alpha King, the conqueror of the North, and in his eyes she saw not command, but a desperate plea. He was offering her the truth, a vulnerability she knew he had shown to no one else. He was laying the fate of his entire lineage at her feet. Would you have trusted him when he revealed you were not just his mate, but the last hope for his entire bloodline? Tell me in the comments, and if you are not subscribed yet, join this family. Verity looked at the man kneeling before her, the weight of his confession settling in the quiet room. He had not chosen her out of madness or whim. He had chosen her out of a desperate, ancestral hope. He had seen something in her that no one else had, that she had not even seen in herself. She was not a prize. She was a key. I don't know how, she finally whispered, the words feeling small and inadequate. If what you say is true, this power, I don't feel it. I don't know how to use it. But you will learn, Roan said, a certainty in his voice that she did not share. It is in your blood. Here with me it will awaken. He reached out, his fingers hesitating for a moment, before they gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was like a spark on dry tinder, a jolt of heat that shot through her. I will help you. She searched his face, looking for the trick, the manipulation. But all she found was a raw, aching sincerity. For the first time, she did not feel like a prisoner. She felt like a partner. All right, she breathed. I will stay. I will try. A wave of relief so profound washed over his features that it momentarily softened the hard lines of his face, making him look younger. The tension he carried in his powerful shoulders seemed to ease, just for a moment. He nodded once, a gesture of solemn gratitude. The days that followed were a slow, careful unfolding. Roan moved her from the isolated North Tower to a sprawling suite of chambers next to his own. They were magnificent rooms, with rich tapestries depicting the history of his clan, and a balcony that overlooked the snow-dusted peaks of the surrounding mountains. And most importantly to Verity, one of the rooms was a library. It was a treasure trove, filled with the books and scrolls of his ancestors. Here, she found her purpose again. With Rowan's guidance, she delved into the history of the weavers. The texts were obscure, written in codes and allegories, but her archivist's mind was made for such puzzles. They spent hours together in the quiet of the library. He would sit by the fire, sharpening a blade or mending a piece of leather tack, his presence a warm, solid weight in the room. He rarely spoke, but she felt his eyes on her as she worked, a gaze that was no longer assessing, but protective, attentive. She learned that the weaver's power was not a grand, showy magic. It was quiet, rooted in empathy and connection. It was the ability to feel the frayed edges of a person's spirit, the discord in a pack's harmony. And it was the ability to gently, patiently weave those threads back together. As she read, she began to feel it in herself, a subtle hum beneath her skin. When Roan was near, the hum intensified, becoming a tangible pull toward him, an ache in the center of her chest that was both painful and sweet. The mate bond. It was real, and it was growing stronger every day. One evening, he was training in the courtyard, his movements a brutal, efficient dance of violence against a series of practice dummies. He moved with inhuman speed and strength, but she could see the strain. She could feel it. A disconnect. A slight hesitation between his intent and his action. The frayed bond he had spoken of. He growled in frustration, his fist splintering the wooden post of a dummy. He didn't know she was watching from a gallery above. He finally stopped, breathing heavily, and leaned against the cold stone wall, his head bowed in defeat. His frustration was a bitter taste in the air. Later, she found him in the armory, running a whetstone along the edge of his greatsword. The scrape of steel on stone was a harsh, grating sound. A gash on his forearm, earned from a splintered training shield, was bleeding sluggishly. She approached him silently, carrying a small bowl of water and some clean linen. He looked up, his eyes wary. "Let me," she said softly, her voice not asking permission, but stating an intention. He watched her, his jaw tight, but he did not pull away as she gently took his arm. His skin was hot to the touch, radiating a fierce, animal heat. As she cleaned the wound, her fingers brushing against his skin, she focused on that humming inside her. She let it flow from her, a quiet, soothing energy. Under her touch, the tension in his arm began to dissolve. The hard line of his jaw softened. He let out a slow breath, and the growl that was always rumbling just beneath the surface of his control went silent. Utterly silent. His head tilted, and he looked down at her, his expression one of pure astonishment. "How?" he rasped. "I don't know," she admitted, her heart pounding. "I just focused on being calm." He turned his hand over and curled his large, calloused fingers around hers. The contact was electric. The bond between them flared, a sudden, dizzying rush of heat and connection. For a heartbeat, she felt what he felt, the crushing weight of his crown, the loneliness of his power, the constant, gnawing frustration of his frayed bond with his wolf, and beneath it all, a bone-deep yearning for her. It was too much. She gasped and pulled her hand back, her cheeks flushing. His silver eyes were dark, intense. He looked at her not as a healer or a key, but as a woman. The air between them grew thick, charged with a new, dangerous energy. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. The moment was broken by the harsh clang of the armory door being thrown open. A captain of his guard stood there, his face grim. "My king," the man said, bowing his head. "A rider from the southern border. It's Lord Valerius. He has allied with the Stonecrest pack. They are marching." The softness vanished from Roan's face, replaced instantly by the cold, hard mask of the Alpha King. The warrior was back. He rose to his full, intimidating height. "Their purpose?" he demanded. The captain hesitated. "They claim you are under the sway of an Omega witch. They claim they are coming to liberate her and to challenge your fitness to rule." Roan's rage was a terrifying thing. It was not loud or explosive, but a sudden, chilling drop in the temperature of the room. A low, predatory growl escaped his lips, and his eyes bled from gray to molten silver. His wolf was present, and it was incandescent with fury. "They will not touch her," he snarled. He turned to Verity, his expression fierce and possessive. "You will remain in your chambers. You will be protected. No one will get through these walls." But Verity shook her head. The timid Omega from Blackwood was gone. In her place was a woman who was just beginning to understand her own strength. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I will not hide. This is about me. I will not be a weakness for you to defend." I will stand with you. He stared at her, a conflict warring in his eyes, the instinct to protect her warring with a dawning respect for her strength. This is not a debate in a library, Verity, he warned. This is war, blood and steel. I am a weaver, she replied, the title feeling true on her tongue for the first time. My place is at the heart of the pack, and your heart is on that wall. I will not be left behind. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, a slow, grim smile touched his lips. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. It transformed his harsh face into something devastatingly handsome. So be it, he said. Then stand with me, my heart. The preparations for the siege were swift and brutal. Stonefall Hold transformed from a royal court into a military camp. The clang of hammers on anvils echoed through the courtyards as armor was mended and weapons were sharpened. The air grew thick with the scent of steel, oil, and the nervous sweat of warriors. Roan was a whirlwind of command, his voice a sharp bark that cut through the noise, directing his men with an efficiency that was both terrifying and brilliant. He moved with a purpose that left no room for doubt or fear in his followers. Yet, through it all, Verity felt his awareness of her, a constant, invisible thread connecting them across the chaos of the hold. He would glance up to the battlements where she stood, his eyes finding hers, a silent question and a reassurance passing between them. She refused to be a damsel locked away. She found her own role in the defense. She moved through the kitchens, ensuring the stores were properly managed and that the families of the warriors were cared for. She walked the infirmary, her quiet presence and calm words soothing the frayed nerves of the healers. The people of Stonefall, who had once looked at her with suspicion, began to see her differently. They saw not an Omega witch, but a woman of quiet, unshakable strength, a Luna. The enemy arrived at dawn, a dark tide of armed shifters flowing into the valley below the hold. At their head were Lord Valerius and the Alpha of Stonecrest, a brutish man named Fendril. Their banners, the Black Wolf of Blackwood and the Stone Fist of Stonecrest, flapped defiantly in the wind. Roan stood on the main parapet, Verity at his side. He had tried to send her back, but she had laid a hand on his arm, the touch both a plea and a command, and he had relented. He wore black iron plate armor that made him seem even larger, a true demon of war. Verity! Valerius's voice boomed up the cliff face, amplified by the valley's acoustics. You are being held by a madman. We have come to free you. Denounce him, and you will be spared. Verity looked at the man who had never once truly seen her. He wasn't here to save her. He was here to reclaim his pride, to punish the king who had shamed him. She stepped forward, her simple dress a stark contrast to the armor and steel around her. Her voice, though not loud, carried with a strange clarity on the wind. I am not a prisoner, Lord Valerius, she called down. I am home. A roar of approval went up from the Stonefall warriors on the wall. Valerius's face contorted in a mask of fury. So be it, he screamed. Tear it down. The assault began. A hail of arrows arced toward the walls, thudding into wood and stone. The warriors of Stonefall answered with their own volleys. The battle was joined. Roan was a force of nature. He moved along the battlements, a blur of black iron, his greatsword a silver arc of death. But the attackers were numerous, their assault relentless. Ladders scraped against the stone walls. A battering ram began to pound at the main gate, the rhythmic booms echoing like a death drum. Verity felt the fear of the defenders, the collective anxiety, a sharp, discordant hum in her soul. She knew she could not fight with a sword, but she was not defenseless. She turned from the wall and ran, not away from the battle, but towards its heart. She descended deep into the fortress, to the chambers beneath the throne room, a place she had only read about. The heart chamber. In the center of the circular stone room was a massive, unhewn pillar of granite that rose from the floor and disappeared into the ceiling. It was the Heartstone, the very foundation of the hold, a place of immense, ancient power. The air here was thick, buzzing with energy. She placed her hands on the cold stone. It felt like touching a living thing. Closing her eyes, she reached for the humming power inside her, the gift of the weaver. She did not try to command the stone's power. She connected with it. She let her own energy flow into it, not as a demand, but as an offering. She began to sing. It was not a song of words, but of tones, an ancient looping melody she had found in the oldest scrolls, a song of binding, of strengthening, of unity. On the walls above, the defenders felt it. A sudden surge of strength flowed into their limbs. Their fear receded, replaced by a cold, resolute courage. Their aim grew truer, their shield wall stronger. The chaotic noise of battle seemed to coalesce into a single, unified purpose. Roan felt it most of all. The frayed connection to his wolf suddenly snapped taut, whole and perfect. A wave of raw, primal power flooded him, a strength he had not felt since he was a youth. He threw back his head and let out a roar that was not man, but pure wolf, a sound of absolute dominance that rolled over the battlefield and struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. The attackers faltered. They could see the change. The defenders were fighting with a renewed, almost supernatural ferocity. The very stones of the fortress seemed to aid them, arrows glancing off at odd angles, ladders slipping for no reason. Down in the chamber, Verity poured all of herself into the stone. The power flowing through her was immense, a raging river. Blood began to trickle from her nose, but she did not stop. She was the heart of the pack, and the pack needed her. The main gate splintered, then burst inward. Fendrel and Valerius, leading their elite guards, stormed into the courtyard, only to be met by Roan. The Alpha King descended the main stairs to meet them, not as a man, but as an avatar of war. His silver eyes glowed with an inner light. He moved with a speed that was impossible, a black cyclone of death. He met Fendrel's charge, and his greatsword shattered the other Alpha's shield and bit deep into his shoulder, sending him staggering back with a scream of agony. Valerius, seeing the tide turn, watched in horror. He saw Roan, a king fully bonded with his wolf, an unstoppable force. He saw the warriors of Stonefall fighting as one, their spirits woven together. And he understood. The Omega had not been a weakness. She was the source of this terrifying new strength. Roan dispatched Fendrel's guards and cornered the wounded Alpha. With a final brutal strike, the battle in the courtyard was over. He turned his glowing silver eyes on the last man standing. Lord Valerius. Valerius dropped his sword with a clatter. He fell to his knees, his head bowed, his neck bared. Submission. Complete and abject. The fighting outside the walls died down as the attackers saw their leaders fall. The battle was won. Roan did not spare Valerius a second glance. He turned and strode back into the hold, his steps echoing with purpose. He followed the pull of the mate bond, the thread that led him down into the heart of his mountain. He found her collapsed at the base of the Heartstone, pale and still, a trickle of blood beneath her nose. Her work was done. He swept her up into his arms, her body feeling terrifyingly light. He carried her from the chamber, past his stunned and victorious warriors, past the defeated and shamed Lord Valerius. He took her to their chambers and laid her gently on the bed. He sat by her side for a day and a night, holding her hand, his wolf a silent, anxious vigil in his soul. When she finally stirred, her moss-green eyes fluttering open, the relief that washed through him was so powerful it brought him to his knees. He rested his forehead against her hand on the bed. "Verity," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Did we win?" she asked, her voice weak. "You won," he corrected, lifting his head to look at her, his silver eyes shining with an emotion she had never seen in him before. Adoration. "You saved us all." 2 weeks later, the great hall of Stonefall was filled once more. But this time, it was not for a choosing. It was for a bonding. The leaders of the allied northern clans were all in attendance, along with the captured and humbled warriors of Stonecrest and Blackwood. Verity stood beside Roan, not in a simple wool dress, but in a gown of deep forest green silk that matched her eyes. She no longer looked like a mouse. She looked like a queen. Her quiet strength was a tangible presence, a calm center in the powerful vortex of her mate. Roan, the formidable Alpha King, stood before the assembled crowd, his hand holding hers. "You came here expecting to see a king," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "But for too long, my line has been incomplete, a sword without a heart. Today, you will witness the mending of what was broken." He turned to Verity, his gaze softening. He took both of her hands in his. "Verity of the Blackwood pack, last of the Weaver's line, you saw the man when all others saw the crown. You healed the wound no one else could see. You are the heart of this pack, the heart of my wolf, and the heart of my soul. Will you be my mate, my Luna, my queen?" In front of the warriors and lords who had once scorned her, in front of the man who had dismissed her, Verity looked up at her Alpha King, her mate, and smiled. "I am already home," she said. "Yes." He lifted her hand to his lips, and then, in a gesture that shocked the entire hall, he knelt before her. The great Alpha King, the Iron Wolf, knelt at the feet of his Omega. He gently bit the back of her hand, the ancient sign of a formal claiming, and the bond between them snapped into its final, unbreakable place. A flare of golden light erupted from them, washing over the hall, a visible manifestation of their power, their unity. And in that light, everyone finally saw what his wolf had known from the very first moment. She was not just an Omega. She was his other half, his salvation, his queen. Months later, the first snows of winter were blanketing the peaks around Stonefall Hold. Verity sat by the fire in the library, a thick book open in her lap. The fortress was at peace, the rule of the Iron Wolf and his Weaver Queen secure and prosperous. The door opened and Roan entered, shedding his snow-dusted cloak. He looked tired from a long day of holding council, the weight of his crown heavy on his brow. He came to her, and without a word, he sank to the floor and rested his head in her lap. She tangled her fingers in his dark hair, the simple touch seeming to drain the tension from him. He closed his eyes, a deep sigh of contentment escaping him. The great king, the fierce warrior, was at peace. "What are you reading?" he murmured, his voice drowsy. "A story," she said softly, her fingers gently stroking his temple. "About a wolf who forgot how to sing, and the quiet bird who taught him the melody again." He opened his eyes, the silver depths filled with a love so profound it stole her breath. He didn't need to say the words. She could feel them through the bond, a constant warm current between their souls. He was home. He was whole. He was seen. For more stories where quiet compassion conquers the burdens of command, and where being overlooked becomes the source of ultimate strength, subscribe to His Wolf Knew First. So tell me, would you have stayed? Comment where you are listening from tonight. I stay up until my eyes burn to bring you these stories. If this one touched you, do not break my heart. Subscribe and I will see you in the next one.